Is it? Oh.
Mike.
Yeah, I don't want any interference or anything.
And that was the music of Rachmaninoff, the Prelude in C-sharp minor. A reminder that you're tuned into a PIK Classic 88.2. We're coming to you live. We're streaming on cybc.com.cy. And in addition to that, we are also now live on Facebook. I'm just checking. Yes, we are there, and you can see my very special guest. Maybe if you just come on the little on that side. Yes, the Welsh pianist Luke Jones. A very warm welcome to the program. Thank you for being here. Ahead of your concert tomorrow, Wednesday, the 14th of October, at 8:30 at the Shoe Factory. So I'd like to begin by asking you about your role as an artist and your philosophy on music.
Oh, okay. Well,
yes, we have time. Don't
it's
worry.
It's a deep question. You could spend many hours trying to uncover what is it about. I mean, my philosophy on music is always evolving. I think primarily the most important thing for me is that music is there to communicate things that are not easily communicated in words. I'm sure many of us have heard Friedrich Nietzsche's dictum that where words fail, music speaks. And I think that's a good way to sum up what for me music is about. It expresses things expresses whole concepts in a very mysterious way. I mean, when we ask ourselves what music is, it's merely vibration. It's just sound in some respects, but then it clearly has an effect on our conscious experience in a very profound way. And this is always for me like a sort of miracle. Every time I step up onto a concert platform, you're trying to transform something that can easily become something mundane into something sort of transcendent.
Yes.
It's in a strange way, it's actually kind of vaguely religious in a sense. And I think actually the way you have to discipline yourself in preparation for a concert is a bit like that. You have to get your sleep and eat properly and practice hard and discipline yourself, discipline your mind.
I'm glad that you've mentioned that, because I think many people don't realize what actually goes into preparing for performance, and how important it is to have that balance and to have the time and everything else that's needed in order to prepare. Also, in light of that, can you tell us a little about how artists have really had to change their entire outlook because of COVID-19? It's an almost impossible situation now.
Globally, it's been a very demoralizing time. I think demoralization is the word that keeps coming to mind whenever I think of this current period, because, I mean, in my own country, the government has basically given very little support, very, very little support towards musicians and artists in general.
You mean financially?
Financially, but also
morally?
Yeah, morally as well. I'm not going to lie, that is the effect. I think a lot of people feel that we're not valued, despite the fact that in this time, people have tuned into Netflix, people have been reading books, and people have been listening to music, and people have been engaging with art, and yet when it comes to having to actually foot up the cash to try and pay for it, people are struggling with that, unfortunately. And I know it's a somewhat controversial point, and people don't really like talking about it too much, but
no, I think it's a subject that has to be discussed. It has to be brought to the fore, because it's not something that's seemingly going to go away. We've seen that there's been an upsurge in cases, even here in Little Cyprus. We've suddenly got a shock because we had, I think, 44 cases yesterday, if I stand to be corrected. And of course, nothing in comparison with the United States. So it's had an impact on everybody. Yeah,
definitely. Well, with music, I ultimately, although sometimes I can be a bit on the cynical side, I think ultimately I'm an optimist, and I do think that there is a silver lining in this. I think hopefully people, after this is over, whenever that's going to be, I mean, no government in the world has discussed a kind of end game, which is a bit concerning for me personally, but that's the way it is. Nobody's discussed an end game, but I do think in the near future, when this is over, people will be able to evaluate why live concerts are valuable, because we haven't had the opportunity to have them. I mean, most things have been digital, and there's something to be said for digital concerts. I mean, I've actually done some myself in the North Wales International Music Festival, based in St Asaph in North Wales, where I'm from originally.
Yes.
They did a digital festival. It was originally going to be a live festival, and that gave me the opportunity to actually produce my own film, which was really fascinating, because I did a lot of research into recording techniques, video editing, audio editing. So for me personally, that was actually a very useful experience. I got to understand what it feels like to be on the studio side of things, like what it's like to put things together and have to edit things and have to do takes.
It's a pain, isn't it?
It's a lot of work, and I have a huge amount of respect for people who do it. And it is in its own way a creative process.
Yes.
Which is fascinating to me, because I think sometimes on the performance side of things we kind of take it for granted a little bit. It's like, oh, it's just some technical wizardry or something, but actually it is a creative process in its own right. But I think in the absence of live communication, people, I hope, will value it more once this is over. And also, I think it's interesting to discuss the sort of industry complications. So I've noticed that there are several major agencies that have gone bust, for example.
Yes.
And this is a kind of tragedy in its own way. However, again, there's a silver lining in this. I think in classical music in particular, we are paralysed a little bit by not taking enough risk. This is my opinion. I mean,
you mean musicians?
Yeah, musicians.
Yes.
We're kind of very risk averse, and I think we need to think more outside the box. We need to do more creative ventures, not just stick with what we know, not always. And I think this is also with agents. People need to take more risks and take more chances, because I think there's been a tendency, this is my own experience anyway, there is a tendency on the part of agencies to just go with whoever's a safe bet, which I don't think was always the case in the past, actually. I think there were smaller agencies that would see people and think, you know what, I actually believe in this. I think this is an untapped fountain of talent, and I think this needs to be spread to the world. Whereas I've noticed, and this is experiences I've had with my friends and people who I know who are quite successful in their own right,
yes.
They feel kind of dragged through a system, a kind of sausage machine. You kind of just like put out into the concert platform and then just like work to the bone, and there's not really much consideration given to the artist, which I hope is going to change.
And in light of what you've just said as well, it's also a matter of where has that talent been found. If you've been the recipient of a lot of high-profile competitions, and it's opened up doors and it's put a platform. Yeah. But let's not say that the person who came second or third in those competitions, and let's Queen Elizabeth and Tchaikovsky competitions, whatever, that they were somehow sidelined in some way.
I actually 100% agree, and I do think this is something that competitions could change and deal with better, actually, is offering opportunities to people who maybe didn't reach the top, like the very first prize, for example.
Yes.
And people, some competitions are doing this.
has done that, I have to say. Yeah. The Forest Arts Foundation has often brought in young, rising talents, and I've said, wow, when you've been to the concerts, and I said, often to the president of the foundation, Garo Kehian, that we're never going to see this guy in Cyprus again. It's fantastic that you've actually brought him. Yeah. And we've seen a lot of people go on to have sparkling careers who've been here.
Yeah, competitions are ultimately a means to an end, and I think that's obviously something that's changed as well, that winning a competition is never a guarantee.
No.
There has to be some extra ingredient, I think, which extra, I don't know, some creativity or something like that. Because I think competitions are suffering as they're kind of like a dying breed in some respects, but they are also still immensely useful for getting known as you're building your profile and that sort of thing. But as you say, I'm actually in total agreement with this idea that competitors should be offered opportunities to play concerts outside of just person who wins first prize.
It seems also that we have an issue with ethics as far as competitions are concerned too. Lots of jury members with students. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there are places that are trying to combat that, and it is difficult. I mean, psychologically, it's very difficult. I mean, I've thought about this an awful lot, and this is why, in the distant future, if I'm ever invited to become a jury member, I think it's going to be a tough job, actually, in some respects, because if, for example, somebody comes to you and plays a masterclass or something, and then you say, I actually quite like that person, they were very, very kind, very nice people, really enjoyed their playing, and then you see them again, psychologically, you are going to be inclined to favour them over somebody you don't know. I mean, that's just human, I don't know, psychology or something like that. If you have a positive impression of somebody, you're always inclined to favour them more. It's just natural bias kind of thing. I don't know how you can get past that, really. But obviously, I think some competitions are doing the right thing and taking measures to reduce how much influence that has on the jury process. I mean, what I would really like to see, actually, is having blind auditions kind of thing. So we don't actually, so people don't, I mean, what I really liked about the Maria Canals competition in Barcelona, which I won second prize at, we were not actually allowed to see the jury at any given moment during the entire competition, which was really interesting. I didn't even see them. Like, physically, I didn't see them. So I couldn't talk to them. I couldn't even make eye contact with them. I couldn't see where they were in the audience when I played in the competition. It changed it somehow. I think it changed it for them, actually, and I think that's the right way forward.
And maybe a better auditing system of being able to add up points. This shouldn't be handled by anybody within. It should be done by a completely neutral, independent financial agency. And that would be a unique opportunity for them, of course, as well, to say that this is what they're going to be doing. I mean, they can align themselves.
The pointing system is fraught with difficulties. And my heart goes out to the people who have to deal with having to sort out these problems, because I think with competitions it is a game of averages, and then unfortunately you can result in ironically the most average person coming out on top, because you could have somebody who's really something unusual that divides opinion, maybe is quite difficult. Some people might be extremely enthusiastic, they love their playing, and then you get somebody, oh no, it's rubbish, I hate it, I can't stand that person's ideas. But then you get somebody who's maybe like, it's inoffensive, it's it's fine.
Difficult.
But at the same time, they'll be in the middle. So
going back to online consumption, really the online consumption of classical music has risen during this period, which I think is one of the positive aspects of Corona, and that we've all been able to breathe a little more deeply than we usually do, and to partake in our surroundings and to be a little more aware. So, for example, Spotify, with their paid subscriptions, what do artists who haven't paid attention to social media following, what do you think that they are able to do? You're young and you've basically looked after it, but I'm sure that you realize now that there's far more that you can do to attract.
Definitely. I mean, a good friend of mine, Luke Faulkner, he started out with quite a small YouTube channel, and now he's got something like 25,000 subscribers on YouTube. But then he also has, at the peak, he was having 1.3 million listeners a month on Spotify, and that's something that he's grown over the last 2 years. He performs his own works, and he also performs some well-known pieces, and he's actually the one that got me into doing filming and recording myself, actually. And he's somebody who's kind of made it work for himself. I think social media, it has untapped potential. However, it's got to be used with caution, because I think it's one of those things that whenever you have new technology, there's always pitfalls, because we don't know how to use it. We don't know how to adapt to it. I think this is a problem with technology, full stop. I mean, you think it's less than 100 years ago that, people had to travel by horse and cart to places. The world has moved so quickly and developed so quickly that I don't think evolutionarily we were actually adapted to having these radical tools. Even just something like the weapons of warfare, for example. Within a century, we've suddenly got something that can destroy the world several times over, and our relationship with technology is always going to be fraught with difficulty, I think. And social media for musicians is one of those things that can be a blessing and a curse. I think it can make people too self-aware, people become too self-conscious, which I don't think is a good thing, ultimately. I think it's not good to see yourself in the third person all the time. I'm being a bit unclear here, but I think it's important that we need to see ourselves in the first person. We
Yes.
we are looking outwards, not rather than always looking at ourselves from outside, which I think this is a symptom of, unfortunately, 21st century culture.
Yes, the ego.
Yeah, exactly, the ego. And I think social media can have an issue with kind of bolstering that. It can really grow it in a very unhealthy way. That being said, I think, as I say, communication-wise, social media and YouTube and Spotify, all these platforms are great as free advertising, being able to get people to know what it's about.
You've hit on a very important word.
Yep.
Free advertising.
Yeah.
I was very happy to hear your Bach suite before we went on air.
Oh, yeah.
And I looked and I thought, oh, this is really nice. And I saw immediately, I didn't need to look at it. I just had it playing while I was working, and I was reading up about you. And one has an immediate sense of balance, especially because it's Bach anyway.
Yeah.
But I was very grateful that YouTube recording was there.
Yeah.
And I so many times become so frustrated when musicians say, I have to be paid in order to hear something or be able to have access to that. And I'm thinking, especially after a concert, if something has been uploaded, I can understand why somebody doesn't want to put something up before. But what about after a concert and having a substantial portion of that work to be able to listen to and to appreciate and to understand? So following on your free advertising comment.
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously purely my own personal opinion. I know there's many people who would disagree with it. But for me, if I record a live concert and I decide to upload it, that for me is, it belongs to everybody. Then I give it away, essentially. And I don't really see my need to be compensated for that. I know some people say, yeah, well, I want to make my money from my recordings, etc., etc.
Yes.
But ultimately, I want people to listen to my playing as the bottom line. And I think we have to try and figure out ways to adapt to this new form of consumption, and people come to expect it that way. And I don't think they're necessarily wrong to expect it that way. It's just we've got to try and adapt to it in that way. And yeah, I mean, that Bach, for example, I performed in the RNCM in Manchester, it's the Royal and College of Music, and it was the first live concert I've done since February. It's a long time.
Yes.
There was an audience of about 30 that was socially distanced in there.
How did you feel on the platform again after such a long period of time?
It felt very strange. I've got to say, it was kind of like a dream, like a very strange dream that I'm kind of in between waking up and falling back to sleep again. It was very, very weird.
Nerves?
Nah, not really.
Not really.
I didn't feel. I just completely felt absorbed.
Like the bicycle story analogy, you just get back into it.
Yeah, I just got totally absorbed into what I was doing. And I think this is obviously, plays back into that ego thing. I mean, you got to try and lose it when you're performing. That's the most important.
Music and trauma seem to have a fraught relationship. Intuitively, it may seem a positive thing for artists to respond to traumatic events. But I wonder if work and referencing the pandemic actually increases awareness and understanding, or do you think it's a way of generating attention? And I'm thinking particularly of episode or events like the Finnish National Opera, Covid fan tutte, which I'm sure that you heard about, the new libretto, a reworking of Mozart's opera. For those listeners who don't know about the pandemic, the filmed performance is going to be available March 2021. And I saw a brief trailer of it and I thought, do I really have to look at this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know how to answer that because personally...
I mean, don't take that particular example. I mean, let's just discuss it in general so that we don't offend the Finns. But I mean, I think when you do something, you have to be open for critical analysis, and it's obviously a personal opinion.
Yeah. So are you asking, so should it be referenced in some way, the COVID? I mean, for me, the concert is really, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a form of escape, but it is kind of a form of escape, really.
Yes.
So it's a way of transporting you away from the mundane, and I think we've all heard enough about the bloody coronavirus.
Yes, we've got corona fatigue.
Yeah, well, definitely. I've definitely got corona fatigue. I mean, I wake up in the morning and think, is it still going on? I mean, I often say to a friend of mine, actually, if I woke up and it was March 21st tomorrow and things are all back to normal and my schedule was as it was last spring, I wouldn't question it. I would just think, oh, okay, I'm okay, quite all right. The last 6 months have just been a sort of bad dream, but...
It's also brought about the BBC Proms announcing the BBC Proms 2020 announcing a whole range of new commissions. Would you see that as something positive about with COVID in mind?
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, I might get a bit in trouble for saying this, but I just think it's a cynical marketing attempt.
Yes.
That's full stop. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it.
Right.
It is what it is. It's just a cynical marketing attempt. It's trying to find substance where there is none, I'm afraid. That's my opinion. And that's unfortunately music, classical music in particular. I mean, I don't know what it's like in other countries, I can't say, but in the UK, there's definitely a lot of managerial types who have not an artistic bone in their body that just decide that they want to make arbitrary decisions on the behalf of musicians without having a single clue what they're talking about. So
yes.
And I think BBC's not...
in your paper on music and ideology, very well written. Yes, very well written. You refer to classical music and how it became more open with the rise of the middle class and universal suffrage. And I wanted to ask, what is ideology, and how does it play a role in the way we make judgments on the music we listen to and our perceptions of art?
Ah, well, so we're really delving in deep now.
Yes. I thought it would be interesting to have
okay,
your
well,
opinion and for others to
it's a
hear.
while ago since I wrote that essay, but actually I'll try and expand on it a bit. So the role of ideology, I think, can affect art in quite a profound way, positively and negatively. I think to make action, so to take action, to create art, requires some kind of foundational basis, whether it's an ethic, whether it's an aesthetic, whether it's any kind of semi-coherent set of ideas that have to be moved in some way. And I think, but this can also be applied to the interpretation of those ideas. And I think this is one of the problems that we face today in the decline. I mean, this is, again, just my opinion. In the decline of religious ideas, we're seeing a higher prevalence of secular ideologies. And you see this all over the place in all walks of life. And I think it's also happening in academia, it's happening in classical music. And people apply a certain set of ideas as though they were universal to the interpretation of, say, art or music, when it's just simply not the case. Things aren't necessarily always true just because you say it is. You have to kind of come up with reasoning and evidence for why that is the case. And I think the thing is about music is you have your set of ideas, but you have to try and also distance yourself from them at the same time. You have to try and tune into that raw experience of what it is to experience art. And this is where I guess in the sense I'm a universalist as a person. I can take something like gamelan from Bali or Tivan throat singing, for example, in the Central Asian steppe, and I don't feel as if I can't be moved by this unless I have to be of that culture, if that makes sense. I feel like fundamentally in art, there is something universal that can be expressed to anybody who's receptive to it and open to it. And I think this requires us to be able to observe, are we possessed by an ideology or do we possess an ideology? And those are two different things. And I think when we are possessed by an ideology, we think that is the world, whereas when we possess an ideology, we think, okay, this is not necessarily the world, but this is the lens with which I'm going to try and interpret the world, and I'm always aware of that fact. So it means that I'm not going to try and universalize the experiences of others through the experience of myself. It's difficult to unpack it, but I'm trying my best.
No, a very, very valid point. And how do you believe, because obviously politics has an influence on how all of this is interpreted.
Yeah.
How do you believe you can ensure that people are open and receptive to different ideas? Because it seems that we're becoming more and more closed and there's a certain indoctrination.
Yeah.
And it's not only here; it's around the world.
Yeah.
We see it from major powers.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first and foremost, I would say I don't believe that the personal is political. I know this is something that's a very commonly held idea nowadays, that the personal is political, but I don't believe it is. I think the two realms have to be separated, and I think politics has to be conducted, at least with your allies, or your supposed allies, they have to be conducted in good faith. You have to have good faith dialogue. You can't assume that the person you're talking to necessarily knows all the same things that you do, and you know all the same things that they do, and that the only way to achieve any kind of unity in dialogue is to accept difference and promote kind of I think in a sort of political terms, you have to kind of cultivate not only critical reasoning. That's very important.
Yes.
Critical reasoning and being able to take text or take ideas or take whatever it is and be able to critique it in a meaningful way and understand the symbolism that is spread throughout all whatever ideological components that are made up of. And I think also promoting culture and appreciating that it's valid on its own terms, if that makes sense.
Do you, obviously you've done that, and you're a deep thinker, which is why I wanted to follow this track in our interview and discussion today. How do you believe we can encourage further critical thinking, which I totally concur is essential in expanding our outlook, our vision, and our openness to other ideas? Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think you can take quite simple maxims. Actually, there's a Canadian psychologist called Jordan Peterson. He's done many lectures on YouTube. Interesting chap. And there's a phrase that he likes, which is assume that the person you're talking to knows something that you don't.
Yes.
And I think that's a pretty decent maxim to live by, actually. I think we have to open our ears and listen. That's the most important thing. You have to be receptive to ideas rather than just running, with a sort of beating drum with your own ideas. I think the root of it is essentially, in some respects, humility, which is, I know myself and Garo were talking about this yesterday. And the thing is about humility, it's one of those things that you try to grasp it, you no longer have it. But it's an attitude that you either take or you don't take. It's really up to you.
Yes.
And I think if you want to try and get anywhere in anything, actually, in any endeavor, you have to have a degree of ability to shut down your voice temporarily to listen to somebody else's voice, and then say, okay, right, now I'm going to try and process this and then try and make my opinion on this, something like that.
Do you think people understand the difference between hearing and listening?
No. No. I don't think many people understand that difference, to be honest. And I see this in the sense that on social media and in public, I've noticed there's a tendency for people to mouth things, to say things, without them actually even knowing what they're saying. Because they've never actually taken the time to actually unpack what it is that they're talking about. And that's the difference between hearing and listening. Listening is actually paying special attention. Why did they choose this word? Why did you choose that word? Why did you say it in this specific way? And then actually trying to understand what that actually means, as opposed to, okay, now I've taken something that confirms my bias, now I'm going to spew it out.
Yes.
As rhetoric.
Literally, that's exactly what it is, spewing it out.
Yeah, spewing rhetoric, essentially, which does nobody any good. It doesn't do them any good, and doesn't do everybody else any good.
No. How does music and art more generally differ from science?
Wow, you're really asking me the difficult questions. Though. It's good. It's forcing me to think on my feet and try and come up with cogent answers. How does music and art differ from science? Well, for a start, they express fundamentally different worldviews, I think. The scientific worldview, this is my interpretation of it, the scientific worldview is dealing with what things are and how they might function in a physical context. So how things interact in a physical, materialistic way.
Yes.
Music and art, on the other hand, deals with something much more mysterious and much more difficult to grasp, which is relationships, I would say. The symbolic relationships between people and things, which is different to the material relationship. It's a fundamentally different relationship. So the science is about material relationships. So, something happens in my brain, so I do this or I do that, and then if I touch this object, then I feel this, or electrical signals, essentially, something like that.
Yes.
Music and art is dealing more with psychology, consciousness, history, symbolism, all sorts of different things. It's very difficult to define it, actually, and I think they're both essential viewpoints for the world. Actually, I think, unfortunately, scientific objectivity, and I say objectivity in inverted commas, has not influenced the world totally positively. It's been positive in some respects, because I do think there's certain aspects of religious thinking, for example, or non-scientific thinking, shall we say, which are not beneficial. They can promote behaviors and ideas that are just fundamentally bad. They don't really benefit anybody. We have to kind of evolve out of those ideas. However, the problem is, I feel, with the scientific conception of the world is that it limits everything to material concerns, and life is more than that, and we all know it's more than that.
How does one attain the balance between the two? Because it seems that when there's a crisis, science goes into action and art just gets left behind. But then we realize there's something wrong, there's something missing. We suffer that lack of positive energy, the joy, the love, the creation, discovery, kinship.
Yeah, I mean, this is really such a difficult topic to really talk about. I think it's interesting, actually, in the First World War, for example, there's a saying in the UK that the churches were never empty, and I think there's something to be said for that. I think in the 21st century, something that we need to deal with and address culturally, because I can only speak for the UK because that's my homeland and that's where I'm used. That's what I know about.
Yes.
Historically, there has been a removal of the community, the centre, the spirit of what makes the centre of interaction between people within a living within a shared living space.
Yes.
And I think under crisis situations, well, I'm really trying to articulate myself here. It's difficult to really put all the ideas together. But
you're doing well.
I think there's a phrase that comes to mind. I think it was T.S. Eliot, the writer, that said something like that religion is the bedrock of culture, something like that. Or the foundational stone. And I think this is something we need to address. We have all become more secular as societies, which is good in some respects. It's good. I think in some ways it can promote more religious tolerance, which is, I think, ultimately a good thing, personally. I think being able to have tolerance for other people's ideas is important. However, when things get really tough, when you don't have a metaphysical underpinning for why a community should work together, then things can fall into chaos, really. I mean, if you have no shared understanding and shared or cultural experience with your common man, why should you feel the need to help them unless you yourself already practice a certain kind of charitable attitude? But from a sort of base materialistic level,
yes,
it seems to be putting your neck out. It's difficult, it's time consuming. It seems you're putting yourself out for somebody you don't, like a complete stranger, for example, and there's no metaphysical reason to want to do that at the moment, I think. And this is a problem that we're all suffering with, and it's very difficult to address that. We all know that charity is basically a good thing ultimately, but we don't know how to administer that effectively, and this is a real big challenge, actually.
How do you believe that art can play a sustaining role in society?
Well, I think for a start, it needs to be more grassroots oriented.
Yes.
I think that's that's number one on the agenda for me personally. I mean, I love playing concerts in places where they don't necessarily have much music, and this is something, it's a kind of like pet project of mine in the future, in the distant future, when I've got more resources and more money, etc., etc. I would love to be able to, just stick a piano in a trailer and then just phone up a bunch of churches or a bunch of community centres and say, right, we're going to try and organise a concert. I want to get all the community leaders. I want you to all get together, and we're going to put together a concert for the local community. And I want to take this around the place. It's something I'd love to do. There's a friend of mine who's a cellist that also shares the same vision. So one day we're going to do it.
Yes.
We're just going to buy a train.
You're welcome to come back here to do that.
Yeah, I would love to. I mean, I think art can really unify people as long as they feel that it's meaningful. And I think for too long it's become a sort of the preserve of cultural gatekeepers, certain classist attitude, which I don't think benefits anybody.
I thought the elitist barriers were broken down to a large extent.
They are, actually.
Maybe not sufficiently?
I think it's about presentation, ultimately.
Yes.
This is the problem. It's the issue of presentation. I'm not one of these people that says, oh, classical music is elitist, because at its heart, I don't think musicians themselves are elitist. It's the people who run cultural institutions that are generally actually quite elitist in my experience.
Yes.
For example, in the UK, we have music clubs and music societies.
Yes.
And cultural foundations, etc., etc. And some of them are wonderful. Some of them are very generous, educated people that really have a genuine love of music and they want to share it with the world, essentially. And then there's another type of person, I must say, that is very closed-minded, very parochial, and wants to hold everything to themselves. They don't want to share it with people.
Are those class differences?
It's a new form of class. It's a new type of class. I mean,
a pseudo class.
It's a pseudo class.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know what you would call it, literati or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's always existed in one form or another.
Yes.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with being cultured. In one sense, I'm actually a huge snob and a huge elitist. I don't believe in, dismantling all hierarchy. I do believe that, art culture requires investment on the part of the listener or the observer. It requires investment on them. It's not just, you don't just
intellectual investment.
Exactly, it requires intellectual investment.
Right.
But I think where the elitism comes in is where people just go, but you're too stupid or you're too poor to appreciate this or something like that.
Yes, that's very patronising.
Which I have experienced. I've experienced this firsthand actually, and I think it's quite disgusting because I can take my grandmother for example, who is a lovely woman, one of the most kind, warm-hearted people you'll ever meet. She grew up in Brintaig, which is a small village just up the road from where I grew up as well. It's quite historically a very poor village, industrial place. Her father died when she was 13. She had to look after her sisters and her mother, and she had quite a hard-working life, to be honest. And she never really had much exposure to classical music as such. But since I've been playing the piano, she's taken a huge interest. Yes. And this is a person who, by all sort of classist observation, you'd say, well, she's a person who wouldn't understand classical music. But, if I play Brahms' Paganini variations, for example, she recognises immediately. If I play Beethoven's Waldstein Sonata, she recognises immediately. Yes. She loves it. She's really got into it. And I think everybody has this capacity. It's just whether they choose to take on board that or not. And I think this is where we need to encourage people to do this more. I think this is a product of being in a consumeristic society, which is difficult to get away because consumerism does have its benefits as a sort of social and economic philosophy. But where art is concerned, it's a two-way exchange. The observer has to give of themselves to the art as much as the art has to give to the observer. It's not merely, I pay for it now, I want to be in bliss sort of thing,
Yes.
We can't expect it just to be a sort of blissful arrangement.
Part of being an active citizen, in a way, as well.
Exactly,
you have to be an active listener and active citizen.
You have to take the responsibility on yourself, and that's difficult. That can be difficult, but, do you want to live a life with meaning, or do you want to live a life where you're just sort of sedated in this sort of, I don't know, blissful cultural desert or something like that?
Yes. In your concert program, you're going to begin with Bach. Mm-hmm. You're going to move to Handel, Beethoven. You're going to finish with the Waldstein. which was dedicated in 1804 to Ferdinand von Waldstein, Beethoven's first protector in Bonn. There's a certain light, I think, and serenity about this sonata. I don't know if you're in agreement.
Absolutely, yeah, 100%.
Is there a reason that you specially selected it?
Well, I mean, only one person has noticed this so far, and that was my piano teacher. But if you look at the keys of all the pieces that I'm playing in this concert, every single one is in a major key.
Yes.
I think we've had enough depression for the last 6 or 7 months. Okay. I thought, you know what, I'm going to play a program filled with pieces that are just about joy and love and something that lifts us out of the daily experience.
Yes.
I mean, for example, the French Suite. It's a beautiful pastoralic sort of intimate work of which is quite, it's a bit unusual for Bach in some ways, because sometimes Bach's music can be a little dry and a little sort of technical in some respects.
Okay.
Not always.
Yes.
Not always. I love Bach, by the way. Bach's my favourite composer. I have to preface that before I say anything controversial. But this particular work, I would say, is definitely one of his more lyrically gifted works, I would say. It's very intimate, very warm, very, I don't know, just personal, I would say is the word.
Yes. Handel isn't heard so frequently.
No, it's true. The fifth keyboard suite, actually, many people might know it because of the final movement, which is the air and variations, which is often given the subtitle Harmonious Blacksmith.
Yes.
Again, I wanted to kind of convey this...
those Trinity exams when you have to play the harmonious blacksmith.
I guess with this program, I wanted to just give people something fragrant, light sort of music. It's not light in the sense of frivolous, but it's light in the sense that it's
uplifting.
You're certainly not going to sat there listening. Oh, this is very depressing.
Yes,
it's really making me think about this current miserable time that we're living in.
Yes,
or something.
It's been absolutely fascinating to speak to you. Thank you so much for coming to the studio and being part of the broadcast, Luke. And we're very much looking forward to the concert tomorrow evening. I think the tickets are already sold out. Of course, they went very quickly. At the Shoe Factory, so I'm very much looking forward to having you and to listening to the program. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thanks very much.
We've been listening to Luke Jones, and he's going to be performing at the Shoe Factory in Nicosia, 8:30 tomorrow, the 14th of October. And with that, a time check for 12 minutes past 1. Reminder, you're tuned into PIK Classic 88.2, and we are going to listen to Grieg and his much loved piano concerto, opus 16 in A minor. Thank you so much for being part of the broadcast. Thank you.